Thank you, Neil, and welcome everybody. It's terrific to be here, and I would also like to acknowledge Elvin. We just met as I came in the room, and it sounds like you've had an extraordinary career around the schools and communities of Tasmania, and I'm really honoured to be here to talk about much of the same thing today, so thank you. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues, past and present, from the university who may be here today. Sue, Robin, it's lovely to see you both. This is a journey at the university that many of us are on together, so I don't think there's anything that I'll say today that we're not all talking a lot about in the university. I want to start though with an acknowledgement of country, to acknowledge the Palawa Pakana people of Lutruwita as the original and ongoing custodians of Tasmania. And I'll leave you to read what is on the screen, but at times like this, I like to think about place. So right here, where these incredible rivers of the north meet, the Palawa Pakana people raise their children in connection with their country and their culture for generations, 50, 60,000 years. And we're talking at the moment about change in education, and we're hoping to make significant change over the course of the next 25 years, which seems like the most minuscule drop in the time ocean in comparison to where we've come from. So my notes here say, tell them a little bit about you first. So I'm Leanne McLean. I want to thank Neil for some of the lovely things that he's said, but most importantly, I'm a Tasmanian. I was born here in a little place down in the Huon Valley at the Franklin Hospital. I was one of the last babies born at the Franklin Hospital before all the babies were needing to be born in Hobart. My dad's family were also orchardists from the Huon Valley. He met my mum on the mainland. They were in the Navy together, and they settled back at a little place called Police Point when they wanted to come home and have children. My dad left school at 15 to join the Navy. My mum left school at 14 to go to work. I was the first person in my family to finish school at year 12, and I was the first person in my family to go to university. And I've experienced firsthand the difference that education can make in your life. Never on earth, as a child, running around the beaches and the paddocks of Police Point, did I ever think that I would have a career that took me into the places it has and enabled me to help the people that I have. And it's the education that I've had through my life and the teachers that have made an extraordinary difference to my life that have enabled that to happen. So because of that career, I've been working in and around what we call the social policy landscape in Tasmania, particularly as it pertains to children, for a couple of decades now. And in that time, we've managed to pursue some very significant reforms in relation to children and their wellbeing. There are some we're yet to realise. The one that pains me the most is the minimum age of criminal responsibility, which remains at 10, which is far, far too low. Yeah, I feel the same way. But we have a government commitment, and I hope that we get there. I've seen many reforms come and go. I've seen essential learnings come and go. I've seen Tasmania Together come and go. I've seen Tasmania Tomorrow come and go. And each of these reforms, as well-intentioned and pivotal at the time that they were to be, have not made the difference that we intended them to make for our children or for our education system. And I suspect there are some fundamental reasons why that I want to talk to you about today. And I also hope that we can have some discussion perhaps at the end of the presentation, because I'm always very interested in what other Tasmanians think about our education system. In the last 6 years of my career, before coming here to the university, I was the Commissioner for Children and Young People in Tasmania. So that means, similar to Elvin, I've travelled this state. I've travelled the communities, and I've had the great honour of having conversations with teachers, with social workers, with children, with families, about what it's like to experience life growing up in Tasmania and what it's like to experience our education system. We have managed together with many people to establish Tasmania's first strategy to improve the wellbeing of our children. We've ended the routine practice of strip searching our kids from the age of 10. We embedded the first oversight of the out-of-home care system, so foster care, residential care. We have pursued other comprehensive reforms to youth justice in Tasmania. We've advised on how to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course we've had a commission inquiry into the Tasmanian government's response to the abuse of children in institutional settings. All of those things mean that I have a comprehensive understanding of the ecosystem that influences a child's journey and their success in education, because it's not just what happens at school that makes the difference. And if I can, I'd like to take a little moment now to just have a bit of a vision. You can close your eyes if you like and think about this. Think about it from the perspective of where you are now, what you know about society and the people around you, in your families and broader circles, and how many people are struggling. And imagine being born into a world where learning is part of your everyday life, where curiosity is nurtured from your first breath, and every step you take is supported by a community that believes in your potential. From the earliest moments, you're surrounded by stories, questions and ideas. You grow up in a Tasmania where education isn't just something that happens at school. It's woven into the fabric of your life, along with the support you need to support your full potential. Your family, community, culture, peers, schooling, and your university are all a part of this journey. You learn to ask bold questions, explore new paths, and you dream big. And when the time comes, you're ready. You're ready for TAFE, you're ready for university, or you're ready for whatever your learning journey is. Because you've been prepared, not just academically, but emotionally and socially to thrive. Now this is the future that we can all build together. A future where we hope at least 90% of our young people complete their formal education and are ready to go on. That is what we are hoping to achieve over a 25-year period. Now, I wasn't the only person who had a vision like this. Peter Underwood, our previous governor, shared this vision, and this is a quote from him. Education, perhaps more than anything else, is a passport to a better life. Now, I've experienced that personally, and I'm sure many of you have too. It's not just words on a page, it's reality. And as someone who met every child detained in a youth justice detention facility in Tasmania over a 6-year period, I can tell you that not all children in Tasmania are experiencing that vision, and they need to be. So, about a decade ago now, the Peter Underwood Centre was established, and it's a partnership between the University of Tasmania and the Tasmanian government, and it's an association with the Office of the Governor. And I understand the Governor is also the patron of the Royal Society, so we share that in common. It was inspired by Peter Underwood's belief in education as a fundamental right and a pathway to a better life. We bring together research, policy and practice together with our colleagues in the School of Education to really learn more about and influence equitable success in learning across our community. And we have a particular focus on equity, on aspiration and on transformative change. So today, I'm going to really talk about a bit more about inequality, but I want to start with some of the reasons why the Peter Underwood Centre exists and why we're so interested in this concept of inequality. These are the things I'm here to talk to you about today. And I'll go into a bit of detail into some of these areas, and I'll try not to bore you with too much data. The other thing I want to say at the outset is that it's very easy in Tasmania to paint an incredibly negative narrative about our education system and about how we're going in education. I try very hard to steer away from that as much as possible because our educators are amazing. Our children are amazing and they're working under extraordinary circumstances in many aspects. But there is some data that as a society we cannot hide from and we need to be aware of to help shape how we do things into the future. So as we've already discussed, education is one of the most powerful levers that we have to create a fairer and more equitable society. It's a key marker in our participation in childhood. Children aren't just widgets that we teach things to so they can go on and become, drivers of productivity and economic success. Education is their experience of their childhood, and we often forget that. So we hold that very dear. It's access to inclusive, meaningful, impactful, and culturally responsive learning that's a part of growing up well. However, in Tasmania, our success, or our young people's success in their learning, and ultimately our educational outcomes, are persistently lower than other parts of Australia. They are influenced by socioeconomic disadvantage, systemic barriers, and the fact that we are one of the most dispersed populations in Australia. And our work seeks to break those cycles of educational disadvantage and inequity. We generate research and shape policy, design programs, and we work in deep partnership with communities, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also believe, and this is dear to my heart after being Commissioner for so long, that by placing children and young people at the heart of the work, we listen to them, we understand their needs. And by mobilising the knowledge and commitment of our researchers and practitioners and policymakers and families and the young people we work with, that we're striving to transform learning in Tasmania. Now that's all very rosy and aspirational, and now I'm going to go to something that's a bit less rosy, but there's still plenty of room for aspiration. And I really want to talk about inequality. So inequality can be measured in many different ways, but probably the most blunt measure is life expectancy. Now this is a map of the Greater Hobart area. So as you can see, if you live in Newtown, your life expectancy at the moment is 87 years. Or if you're in Sandy Bay, which is where some of our university campuses are, it's 86 years. If you're down at Dodgers Ferry or Sorrel, it's 77 years, so you've lost a decade in your life expectancy. And if you're out at Bridgewater or Gagebrook, it's 67. So that means that for every kilometre you travel north away from that centre in Sandy Bay, you effectively lose a year of your life expectancy. Now, if you unpack this and the data underneath it further, you'll see that where life expectancy is high, you'll see higher levels of educational attainment, higher levels of average earnings, and health outcomes that are vastly different to these other parts of the state. It's stark. And if you project it out to an international scale, it's like comparing one of the richest places in the world, say Hong Kong, with one of the poorest, Eritrea. So this is a serious and prevalent problem in Tasmania. And I've experienced going from one community to the other. And it is possible in a generation. And the thing that makes the difference is your level of educational attainment. Peter Underwood was right. It is transformational. This is just some more of that data that I spoke of. So the higher your post-school qualification, the more likely it is that you'll have good health, earn a good income and live longer. So the graph on the left is levels of educational attainment along the bottom and comorbidities, the health issues that you might have. So the higher your level of educational attainment, the lower the proportion of comorbidities that you are likely to have. And this is nationally collected Australian data. The middle graph is weekly earnings mapped against levels of educational attainment. So your weekly earnings are vastly improved with a bachelor or above level qualification than they are if you have no non-school qualification. And life expectancy is quite similar. So for those with a bachelor level or above, we see a much higher life expectancy than those with no post-school qualifications. This is such a big issue in Australia that the most recent piece of policy, a very large, sort of the policy guide for the next decade in Australian education, particularly higher education, is called the Australian Universities Accord. That was released, I think it was last year, may have been the year before, I think it was last year. And that sets some very bold, ambitious aims, really. One of them is a target and a couple of them are aims. So it tells us that by 2050, 80% of all jobs will require a tertiary qualification. So that's higher education or TAFE, 80%. So when I was at Geeston School, which is where I went to primary school, most of the people who left grade 10 at Geeston School, which is when people left school, many of the, it was very gendered, many of the women went to work in the local Woolworths, the closest was Huonville, and they went to work on checkouts. And that was a pretty good job in our community, and it was a job for life. Those jobs don't exist anymore because you check yourself out at Woolworths. But the jobs that enable that to happen are technical jobs that have built the computer systems that underpin the fact that you can use a self-checkout. That's a really sort of blunt example to explain how jobs have changed and will now change more because of the onset of AI across our community. So if by 2050 we've got 80% of jobs requiring a tertiary level qualification, so higher degree or something from TAFE, we're going to need 90% of our young people finishing their 12th year of education, so the the Tasmanian Education Act, the new one, came into existence in our Parliament in 2017. And that had something to do with that at the time. And it now legislates 12 years of education. So you stay at school until you are 12, until you finish your 12, or you are 18, or you have a full-time job or an apprenticeship or something like that. So we need 90% of our people. And it also sets a target that 55% of Australians aged between 25 and 34 have a university qualification by 2050. It tells us that's what we'll need to meet the job demand that 80% of jobs will require a tertiary qualification. 55% of 25 to 34-year-olds need a university qualification. So think about the 25 to 34-year-olds that are in your world, that you know. Do you think half of them currently have a university qualification? I know mine don't. So we'll just go to another slide. So we're going to need a really strong focus on educational outcomes to reach those types of aims. So let's have a look at the type of gains we're going to need to make across our community and therefore the size of the challenge. So currently in Tasmania, the current bachelor attainment rate, that's a bit over 35% of 25 to 34-year-olds have a bachelor degree. So the target's taking it up to 55%. And on the other side of this slide, if you look at what that means across our communities, it means that in Hobart we're going to need 17% more people attaining bachelor's degrees. We're going to need 80% more in Launceston and the North East. We're going to need 154% more in the South East. And in the West and Northwest, we're going to need 157% more. So in terms of numbers of students per year, that's 1,400 students per year more than what we currently have now, attaining bachelor level qualifications. So that's big. That's a very big effort for our small state. And we can talk about it as numbers, as people, as bachelor degrees, but we're actually talking about people. And we're talking about reducing inequality. We're talking about improving lives. That's what gets me out of bed each day, not necessarily these numbers. This really just reinforces it. So this is sort of like a heat map of Tasmania, which shows you, so the darker the colour, the lower the proportion of the population who have education after year 10, basically. So where the red is darker, so in the far northwest and largely across the north, we have a really big challenge on our hands. It's interesting that you see the pockets around sort of central Launceston and particularly around Hobart. They are the pockets of high levels of educational attainment, which stands to reason. City centres, different types of jobs, but it does not spread far from those urban boundaries. The other challenge in Tasmania, and I'm only going to show you two more graphs. So there's this one. I want to show you either end of the education system in Tasmania and how it's going. So this is our current Year 12 attainment. Now at the moment in Tasmania there are two ways that we measure success in education. We measure it by what's called the completion of the Tasmanian Certificate of Education, which is the certificate you get after 12 years of education. It's called the TCE. Or we measure it through attaining an ATAR, which is the tertiary admission ranking. So that's the score that you're aiming to get in order to get yourself into a range of different university courses. Your ATAR score will ensure that. So we know the size of the population of Year 12 students. We know what number of that population actually go to Year 12. We know how many of them attained a TCE, and we know how many of them have got an ATAR. And what you can see is that over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, things are declining. So we have less, since 2017, we have less students completing Year 12, we have less people attaining a TCE, and we have less people attaining an ATAR. We've had a bit of an uptick last year because we had a larger population, but overall the trend remains down. Now, for my sins, I've been around long enough to know that before 2017, for a couple of years, we had an upward trend. And then a few things happened. So obviously 2019, 2020, COVID happened. That's had a bit of an impact, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But we have, for a range of reasons, less students deciding to go on. There's also an issue with how we measure success. So I don't think that the TCE and the ATAR are the best measures of success. And we desperately need new ones, which is the part of the work that we're hoping to do with the state. Children that I speak to and young people tell me that this isn't fair, measuring them in a number or an ATAR or a TCE, and it doesn't recognise the full breadth of experience that they have, including from their extracurricular activities. So if you've been at a dance school or a music school for 10 years of your life, that's not measured here. And young people tell us that it should be. It's also not measuring things like apprenticeship figures and participation in vocational education in the way that it should be. So they're all we've got at the moment, so they're the measures that we use, but they absolutely need to be revised. So this is the other end of our education system. Now this is some of the data across the country, and particularly in Tasmania that I'm probably the most passionate about. I'm passionate about a lot of things, but this one is incredibly important to me. Every 2 years, the Australian government funds a survey of teachers in prep classrooms across Australia. So prep is the foundation year. It's the first formal year of schooling and it's compulsory. And because of that survey, it's enormous, and I hate to think how much it costs the government every year, but it's well worth it and we should invest more. It tells us the developmental vulnerabilities of our children in their first formal year of school. So it basically tells us how ready our kids are. How ready are they with their physical health and wellbeing? How ready are they with their social competence, with their emotional maturity, with their language and cognition, and their communication skills and their general knowledge? How are they going? Now, despite a huge amount of investment here in Tasmania over decades, so subsequent governments in child and family centres and supports for children in the early years, we have consistently, at best you could describe it as stagnant, at worst you could say that in some areas we've gone backwards. So what we have now is that there's been a significant increase in the developmental vulnerability of children across 3 of those 5 domains. So the percentage of children that were on track and ready for school has also declined. And we have more children now in Tasmania than we've ever had before who are developmentally vulnerable on 2 of those 6 domains. So it means that when they're getting to school, they're not ready in one way or another to receive the amazing skills and benefits that our teaching workforce has to offer them. It's getting a bit harder. Now, if we unpack that and we think about cost of living, and we think about families doing it tough, we think about housing crisis and getting food on the table, that helps us understand some of the reasons why this is happening. This is not something that we can solve inside our schooling system. This is a community problem, and it comes back to how we support families to thrive. There is a plethora of evidence that supports investing in a child's life from that moment of conception through to the end of their second year of life. It's known as the first 1,000 days, where we have the most impact on a child's ability to learn, to grow up and thrive and have a great life. And throughout my time as Commissioner, and still now, I've advocated very strongly for those first 1,000 days supports, and we're starting to get some of them in place, but we still have quite a way to go. So what should we be hoping for in a whole of system approach? What I've tried to do to this point is to help describe the fact that this is not a problem of the school system alone. This is an issue across our society, and that's why we refer to it as an ecosystem. It's more than a system even. It includes schools, it includes regulators, it includes health supports, it includes individuals, it includes curriculum development. There is such a huge range of things at play that we have to have a complex, systemic view. Through the fabulous work of Professor Natalie Brown at the University, we did a fairly comprehensive scan over the course of the last 2 years into what we call the Education Success Project. So we were able to define across the life course the things that we should really be aiming for. So in those early years, we really need our families to have a high level of maternal and child health support through things like child health nurses. For any of you who have children or grandchildren, I know for me the child health nurse was an incredibly important person in ensuring my health and the health of my babies when I had them. They are incredible. Allied health professionals, and it should happen no matter where they live. What does this look like for children who are living in the far northeast, or for children in Zeehan? This is the challenge that we have in Tasmania. In the primary school years, all students have access to high quality teaching and any additional support they need. We should have evidence-based literacy instruction embedded in schools, and we should have trauma-informed and inclusive practices. Students should have access to health screenings and referrals, no matter where they live. Currently children sometimes wait 12 months to 2 years for the type of screening and diagnosis that they need to get the support that they need through disability services to be able to learn. That's too long. And students develop a love of learning through a rich suite of curricula and extracurricular learning. And then in secondary school, our students should be entering secondary school with high levels of literacy and numeracy skill. So the NAPLAN data for Tasmania will tell you that this is not always the case. So there are some areas that we need to work on there. They should have access to engaging teachers with disciplinary expertise, and they should be supported to develop the foundations for 21st century learning. And they should be aware of what their options might be after school. And they should be consistent attenders and make healthy lifestyle choices. I've got a teenager in my house, and I know the healthy lifestyle choices is often a bit tricky, but consistent attending is something that we have an issue with in Tasmania at the moment. Prior to COVID, we had over 90% attendance generally across our schools. That's currently down in the 80s, and in some schools it's much lower than that. And we've only got about half of our kids at the moment across the system attending school 90% or more of the time. So we've got some work to do. COVID impacted school attendance a lot. It's a multifaceted, complex issue, but one that we can tackle with varying levels of support, and we're hoping to do some work on that at the university in the near future. So in senior secondary, we need our students to continue to engage in purposeful senior secondary study. They should have a range of pathways that they can access and appropriate pastoral care to keep them engaged. They can be engaging with potential employers, experiencing life in university courses and vet courses, and really helping them make the decisions to where they go next. And we've also got to remember that because of the way the world now is and the cost of living, many of our senior secondary students are also working quite a bit, and that then carries on through to whatever they do next. So for some, that's a pathway straight to university. For others, that's a pathway straight into work, in which case they might dip their toe in some university or some vocational study, and it really becomes quite circular at the end. There's no linear pathway beyond secondary education anymore. We really need to have a system that's incredibly flexible, where our young people can dip in and out of a range of courses in an effort to eventually attain a higher level qualification. And that's happening in some instances already in Tasmania. Some of the evidence that we have at the Peter Underwood Centre is that by about age 24, even though our attainment data outside of year 12 is quite low, by the time our young people are 24, many of them have caught up through that vocational or university system. So they've been working, they've been doing part-time courses, they may have been doing an apprenticeship or a traineeship. The question we need to ask ourselves is, should we be waiting until 24, really? We could probably enable that a bit earlier if our system is set up. So this has been the desire of the education system in Tasmania for as long as I've been working in and around it. This is not new. Some elements of it are, but overall it's not new. We've had reform agenda after reform agenda aimed at addressing the exact same issues. Politics has influenced education in Tasmania, possibly more than many other states. You will all know that there's a very little distance between politics and everyday life in Tasmania, so it is very influential. Is that right for our education system? Why haven't we moved the dial? So this next slide was me at 5 o'clock this morning thinking, how can I explain something that I guess in many ways is incredibly complex, but just in normal everyday language that I would be able to understand. I suspect the reason that we haven't succeeded in our aims to reform education in Tasmania so far is that we've never actually adopted true principles of systems change across our system. So for example, the number one rule of systems change is that we all agree on the shared goal. What is our education system for? What are we actually aiming for it to achieve? Now, if you take what I would describe as the actors in the education system in Tasmania, so you would have the minister, you would have the university, you would have the unions, you would have the departments, you would have the Catholic system, you would have the independent system, you would have the early years sector, you would have all our regulators, and you have them in a room, and you could ask them to agree on what that is. We've never had that. And when you don't have that, the evidence that underpins systems change theory will tell you that you end up with what's known as accidental adversarial relationships. I think the accident bit is probably debatable, but you see that happening again now. A few weeks ago, our Minister announced the introduction of a new system for schools in Tasmania called multi-school organisations. Now, we've got other actors in the system, for example unions, who are not happy about that announcement. So we already have an accidental adversarial relationship emerging. Now my question is, how does that help our kids, really, when we don't agree and we don't sort this out first? So the view that the university has been emphasising for the last 12 months since we've been on this journey, or at least since I've been here, is that we must agree on that common goal, all of us. And then once we've agreed on what that goal is, and I don't want to oversimplify it because it's not, but once we've agreed, then we can agree on all the things that we would need to see happening for that goal to actually be achieved. Now, they would be things like you saw on the previous slide. We'd need to see these things actually happening. Children thriving in the early years. Evidence-based literacy instruction in our schools. Children becoming competent in literacy and numeracy before they enter secondary school. A rich curriculum that inspires them, fills them with hope about their future opportunities in secondary school. And easy to access pathways and definitions of success as they get into senior secondary school. And then a range of ways that they can access those pathways after secondary school. I suspect that they are what we would need to see to be happening for us to achieve our common goal. Now I could be bold and say our common goal should be that 90% of our young people complete their formal education and they're ready for what comes next. Just like the vision that we went through at the beginning of this presentation. So once we've all agreed on what those things need to be, then we can all agree on all the things we need to do differently in order to achieve them. Because each of us, in one way or another, will be contributing to the problem. And for jurisdictions around the world who have seen gains in complex system change. Ontario in Canada is one. In the UK they've seen some. They have been through processes that have helped them acknowledge what part each actor in the system may have been playing in the problem in the first place. So what is it that we've been doing in our early years system that has not been helping our kids to thrive? And how can we stop doing that and start doing something differently? Those of us who work in education have recently been quite challenged by some of the new evidence that's emerging around the best way, or possibly the best way, to teach our young people to read. And I can talk about that a bit more later. But it is these challenging discussions that we need to be having so that we know what we need to do differently and what it is that we can start doing. And then, that's my favourite bit, the end, is we get on with it. We get on with doing the things that we know we need to do differently in order to see the things that we know we need to see happening in order to reach that goal. Now that's a very simplistic way of thinking about what many academics would describe as a theory of change model for system transformation. But I don't think we need to think about it in such an academic way. We can think about it quite simply. And in Tasmania, at least in the time that I've been a part of social reform, including around education, we have not successfully achieved these 4 quite linear steps. And it's time that we did. So when you hear me calling for a comprehensive long-term plan for Tasmania to transform our education system from one that is underperforming to one that is high-performing, this is what I'm talking about. Now, we're not starting from a zero base because last year the government reviewed the education system, and we had a person called Vicky Bayliss come down and have a look. Now, it wasn't what I would describe as a comprehensive review. It was quite short in time frame, and it did not incorporate the life course of the system. So it didn't include our early years, for example, and it also didn't include what happens after grade 12. But it did have a good look at what's going on in schools, and it gives us a really solid start for the things that we need to be doing differently. So we can use that as a base to design this new system's way of working. Oh, and I do just want to go back one slide. Down the bottom, we often forget what comes down the bottom. So it says strong governance. So by that, I mean knowing who's accountable for what. So who's around that table of all the actors in the system, and who's accountable for what. So where is the minister in this? Where is the university? Where is the department? And who's responsible? We need to design that governance. And we also need really deep partnerships, particularly between the university and the government when it comes to these matters. And we should be obviously monitoring our progress as we go. So if we apply those things and we take what we know out of this independent review, what we know about early years education, what we know about senior secondary and post-secondary education, and we pull it all together, we could actually design one of those theories of change. And some of the things that we know we need to do are beginning to happen already. So we have what's called the Lifting Literacy Initiative. It's happening across the Tasmanian community, which is a new and different way, well, not entirely different, Robin might challenge me on that later, for our children to learn to read. So it's a very structured, explicit approach to literacy skills development in our schools. We are in the throes of negotiating a new partnership between the state and the university on how we educate new teachers. There are new programs of research that are being designed to support the implementation of things like the Lifting Literacy Initiative. And we are continuing to advocate for a systemic plan and a governance model to underpin it all. So I feel hopeful that we will get there. And the role of the university. in that education ecosystem. So I tend to distill it down to 3 parts. We have an extraordinary role in the workforce in Tasmania, and Elvin has played a role in that throughout your career, and others are playing a role now. We do educate teachers and early childhood educators. We also educate speech pathologists, social workers, health professionals, the vast array of professionals and paraprofessionals that contribute to a child's educational success. And that's often what people think of when they think about a university's role in an education system. But it's more than that. We also have a role in research, and not only does that research help inform the way the workforce is educated, it can also help ask some of the really key questions that we need to inform what we do moving forward. So, what is influencing attendance? What differences are the changes in our literacy approach making? These are the questions that researchers at our university will be asking. The third role that I think is often underestimated by universities, and one of the things that attracted me to the University of Tasmania is a deep commitment to this and to grow this, is our connection with community. So we can work deeply with communities to help empower communities' ability for their children to experience learning in every way, in every form. Now, we've been doing this for a little while through the regional engagement programs at the university, but also through the Children's University. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But we'd like to do a lot more, working with communities around the state to help inspire a love of learning and create a community filled with learning opportunities for our kids. And of course we can do a lot of advocacy, a lot of influencing the public discourse about the importance of education in Tasmania. So this is probably one of the most joyous things I get to do in this job. This is the Children's University, and it's basically a statewide community of learners, kids who are aged between 7 and 14. So the University of Tasmania invests about, it's upwards of $700,000 a year in this program. And there are currently 1,400 children and their families and carers involved around the state from disadvantaged communities largely. So it's about informal learning. It's about, we're actually in a learning destination for the Children's University right now. So children from this area can come to QVMAG and they can learn things and they can write about them and they can talk about them and make videos about them. And that means that this is a learning destination. And so they get points when they come here and do these things. And when they have enough points each year, they come to the university and they put a cap and a gown on, just like these amazing young people, and they graduate. Across the stage, just like every other graduate. Now, our research that has run alongside this program for the last 8 years shows us that it influences young people's aspirations, that it helps them build a love of learning, and it helps them build what's known as their self-concept as a learner. So if we go back to that original vision around education, where that young person we spoke about saw themselves as a learner in their community, where there were lots of opportunities for them to learn, this is the kind of thing that this program does. So often at the ends of these presentations, people ask, how can I help? So I just like to pop this slide up. So one of the most important things that people in the community can do is to support reading and literacy in schools. And I know that Rotary groups, including here in Launceston, are doing that, and that's very important. You can help schools participate in the Children's University. You can help businesses, or you might even have one yourself, become a learning destination for children to learn in through the Children's University. You could help to promote or fund research, evaluation, local programs, scholarships. All of these things make a difference to children and their learning. You can support the early years, and I think probably the most powerful thing any Tasmanian can do is to talk about the importance of education. Talk it up. Talk about it at the dinner table, with your friends and family, with their children. And we can stay informed. And I've just put a link there, which I'll happily share with you, Neil, for your website, of a lecture that we recently hosted as a part of the Sandy Duncanson Memorial Lecture Series, where we had distinguished Professor Pamela Snow come and talk to us about a different way of conceptualising and teaching our children to read. Now, our key messages are, whenever you're talking to people about education, that it's everyone's business. It's not just the business of schools. It's all of us across our whole community. And it starts at birth. And those first 1,000 days of a child's life are where we can actually make the most enduring difference for the rest of their life. And we can all learn by listening to children and young people, especially about how they're going in our education system. And that equity is actually what lies at the heart of achieving educational success. And that's it for me today. That's my presentation, and I'm very happy to take questions. I saw there was one at the back already. He was quite enthusiastic, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Incredible messages in your address. And we are recording it today, so it'll be up on the Royal Society YouTube channel within the next week or so. So this message can go out far wider than this audience, and thank you for that. I'll ask the audience for questions, and we only have one microphone at the moment, which Leanne is using. So if you have one, please speak up, and I will endeavour to paraphrase the question or get Leanne to do so in her answer. Thank you.
James Marcos, retired medical practitioner. The proposed ban on social media for the under 16-year-olds, in your opinion, will that help education or hinder it?
It's a great question, and so very timely. I think it will, if this were a simple process and the government were simply able to legislate it and ban it, and that were effective immediately, I think it would have an enormous influence. It's far more complicated than that, and the thing that makes me smile about this whole debate is it completely underestimates the ingenuity of young people. So, in answer to your question, by way of example, I have a teenage daughter in my house and who has many friends who are in our house all the time, which I'm delighted by. And they're all sitting around last night and had social media on their phones, as they do, and they all received notifications from various social media outlets advising them to post on their, their page, that their account, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, is managed by a parent. So that's the first step in what will be an enormous set of steps that children will engineer themselves, largely. So it's not that simple. But what we are seeing is a shift. So more children encouraged by their parents are turning away from social media and are opting for options for phone access that's less smart. So the concept of the light phone and the flip phone is starting to come back into the narrative, which I think is very important. What the ban does do is gives parents leverage that we haven't had. So you can now have a conversation with your young person about social media, similar to the conversation that you can have about alcohol. Because yes, people choose to partake in alcohol before they are legally allowed, but as a society, we know that that's not good for your brain development, so we make it illegal, and most people therefore don't. We haven't been able to have that narrative about social media, and as parents now we will. So I've got one child on one side of the ban and one child who's 10, and I know how my approach will be completely different with both of them as a result. It'll still be challenging, but I feel I've got leverage. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With regard to the areas of education, the East Coast is always left off the map, it's never referred to. And secondly, historically, in Tasmania there's been standards of education. And this has particularly had an impact on the disadvantaged areas of Tasmania. Would you like to comment on that, please?
Yeah, I would. Look, coming from a human rights background, through my time as Commissioner, the things that I think are really important to remember about intervention in education are that we should have universal interventions, which include the East Coast, and which can also be proportionate to need. So that's a really fundamental principle of how access to human rights works. We should have universal interventions that can also be proportionate to need. Now, in a state as dispersed as Tasmania in terms of population, those universal interventions can be really hard. So we need to think about those concepts in how we create policy more and better, how we train our teachers more and better, and even our housing policies, because all of these things influence the access that the kids on the East Coast have relevant to the kids in Hobart or Launceston. Thank you.
Can I add something about the
Just
action
one
that
at the
directly
back,
follows
please.
on?
I'll come to you.
Okay.
Just one at the back.
My name's Peter Underwood. I'm a philosopher, and in particular, for many years of formal employment, I was a philosopher of education. One thing I tried to get people to think about was what on earth, stand back from the mechanics of education and ask, what on earth the point of it all is? That goes to your goals thing.
Yeah.
And my ears perked up when we started talking about that, and I said, yes, it'd be nice, and I have long experience of trying to moderate discussions about that. But I was flabbergasted when you said, here's my goal, 90%. That ain't an end of that sort.
No, you're right.
It's sort of like, what's the purpose of it? Why would we even bother investing it? What's the good at the end? What's the end that we should endorse? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And to be fair, before I said that, I think I said I could be challenging. I'm not sure if I said cheeky or challenging, but it was one, because I know that it is a bit cheeky and a bit challenging. So that's the national target, 90%. And we sort of get very, in the sort of neoliberalism that sometimes takes over the place, it's very easy to get sidelined and sucked into those targets. At the beginning of the presentation, I spoke about education actually being a part of childhood. That's how our children are experiencing the world. Think about how much time they spend in that system. And so often we forget that. So I really take your point, and I agree that we shouldn't be sidelined by economic targets, and we should remember what education is actually for.
Wrong. You're making it sound like there's some fact of the matter. What education is actually for. It's a value judgment. It's a decision as to what it should be for, and there can be dispute between reasonable people about it.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, as long as we keep what's in the best interests of our kids at heart, because what we've seen in Tasmania over decades and decades is that I'm not even sure if we've been having that discussion in the right way, but what I can see is that the way we've been doing it and the way policy flows have existed as a result is doing our kids a disservice, and we need to do better at that.
Can I follow up on the East Coast thing? Sue Kilpatrick, I have many roles. I've been on Tasmanian Early Years Foundation. I'm currently on the Tasmanian Traineeship and the Friendship Committee. I'm a professor at the University of Tasmania. I'm also on the board of Eastern Tasmanian Education and Employment. Let me tell you about a success story that meets a lot of the sorts of things that Leanne's talking about. So I've done research on the East Coast over many years and more recently about post-school pathways and careers, and helping the community understand what they are, and involving industry and schools and employers and parents and so on. And we did 3 communities around Australia, right? We came away thinking on the East Coast as the first, like the first distance scope. Now, fast forward, that was 2021. Fast forward to 2025. The East Coast has got a regional university hub. They got one in the last round. It's not just for higher education, it's for vet. They've got money from TASTAFE to also build some, as well as from the Commonwealth, to build in training. And, wait for it, they are about to, I'm on the board of this, we are about to join with the Jobs Hub, the BODEP, the Break a Day, it's a Jobs Hub. And this is a first for the country. The Jobs Hub and the regional university and the vet sector all working together, so national first. And also the Jobs Tasmania is interested in a pilot for the youth strategy about pathways on the East Coast.
It's fabulous.
And one of the reasons I think that's really relevant.
Succinctly, please, so others can join the conversation.
Finish on.
Well, it finishes with that bottom line that you had in your slide. It's about communities working with the system.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to,
It's terrific. Thank you. Yeah.
Just for something bright side for a minute.
You were talking about students and their ATAR scores and going, I can't get that, to go to university. There is another pathway to that, to take, to have a diploma, which will get you to university, not at a level 3, which ATAR does, but at level 5. So you actually have one subject less the first year. How many students or parents know that, and can we make them aware of it?
Yeah, well, I don't think many do. And the other thing we have at the moment too is what's called the Schools Recommendation Program.
Yeah.
So I'm advised, and I was amazed by the number, 90% of young people who are leaving Year 12 and coming to the University of Tasmania are no longer coming through that traditional ATAR pathway. They're coming through what's called the Schools Recommendation Program, which means their school, their teachers have used a rubric that was designed by people at the University of Tasmania, and they're basically saying whether or not that young person is ready for university study. Now that is fabulous in so many ways, including that it restores trust and faith in our teachers as the people who are best placed to make those judgments in collaboration with the child themselves. So I think Tasmania is really leading the country in quite a bit of that. There's this sort of sad addiction to the ATAR in many jurisdictions, particularly amongst, I guess, the more, what could be described as the more higher socioeconomic ends of our society, where the ATAR's, it's a bit like a currency. You know, you hear parents say to their children, don't waste your ATAR. I spent the week before last at a conference with many young people and system leaders from around the country talking about just that issue. And young people, they don't want the ATAR, many of them. They want something far more comprehensive. And I think we have part of the answer here we should be very proud of.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Our son got to
Robin.
Yeah, it's a simple question, but I think one that this group might be influential in. You talked about getting all the stakeholders in the room and getting them to agree. How might people such as us or community members encourage? And you've also talked about the closeness between politics and life in Tasmania.
We need an education science.
Well, we do. I mean, I'm probably, I'm thankful, a bit privileged and very thankful to be able to have conversations with people like our Minister for Education and our Premier about these things, and they are listening. So in terms of what others can do, talk about how it would make a difference. The thing I know about politics in Tasmania is that the public discourse here can influence political decision making and policy probably more than it can in many other jurisdictions. So if we're talking about it and others are seeking and advocating for it, then it starts to get its own wind behind it and it can become something in and of itself. I think we should have something that, like the the Tasmanian Education Partnership or the Tasmanian Education Manifesto, something that we as a community have agreed is the thing that we are doing for the next 20 years, for the benefit of our kids, so that it doesn't matter what happens politically, and goodness knows that's been, a bit unstable for the last few years, so that it doesn't actually matter, that we have a solid plan that transcends politics, that's in the best interests of our kids and our system. Thanks for that question, Ron. It's a really good one.
One at the back, John.
Thanks, Neil. I have two questions. One quite quick one, I think. 4 slides back with the young people going to university coming out with their hats and gowns. They were all female.
Yeah, there is a much higher rate of female participation in the children's university than there is with males. And if I go back to my time as Commissioner, I would run the Commissioner's Ambassador program around the state, where I worked with hundreds of kids. Also a much higher participation of females than males.
Thank you. Second question was, as you have the broader community, what is your conclusion to the remedy of Ashley?
Oh, that's a big question. So Ashley's a building. Fundamentally, it's a building. And it's a building that has an extraordinarily horrible history. I've probably spent more time in the building than many people in the community, and it's, as a building, it's an awful place. It's the people and the programs and the strategy that underpins the building that actually makes the difference for children. So I would argue that if we had our policy settings right, a lower minimum age of criminal a higher minimum age of criminal responsibility, a higher age of detention, a policing service that was set up and supported by comprehensive social work and youth work, a child protection system that was operating in the way we envisaged it would, that we would hardly have a need for a detention facility for a state of just 500,000 people. Fundamentally, if a kid ends up in detention, it's because other systems have let them down. And every kid I met had needs. That had those needs been addressed, I think their life trajectory would have been quite different.
Sure. We'll start from where you started your conversation.
It does. It starts there.
I think we all understand that. Have you had discussions with past Inspector Brett Smith?
Oh, I may have, yes. So Ashley is closing and a new detention facility is being built in the south. I think what we have to be careful of is that we don't inadvertently reinvent a wheel and have the same thing. And I know the government are very live to that, and I keep a close eye on it. But I don't have enough information available to me yet to make the determination as to whether we're actually... Yeah, but the real test for this state is going to be the minimum age of criminal responsibility. While ever it's 10, we will have a problem.
Time for one more question. I think, Simon, did you have one?
I was going to ask, is the education of the parents having any effect on the skills of the children going to school?
Yeah, look, there's quite a bit of evidence that does link the education of the parent, particularly mum, with the educational levels of the child, and you do see that in the data. I've been challenged recently by a different view on reading. So I have always been very strong in saying that early access to literacy, so being read to, connecting with a child from birth, is fundamental to them learning how to read. Now, Professor Pamela Snow has challenged that and said it's not the role of parents to teach children to read, it's the role of schools. So the nuance to that message is there is enormous benefit in reading to children from birth and surrounding them with talking, reading, laughing, connection in its development of oral literacy. and then that can underpin that technical skill of learning how to break down a word, which Robin will know far more about than me. Professor Robin Cox is our professor of all of these things at the university, and those two things are linked. So after clearing that up with Professor Snow, I will continue on my relentless campaign that every child should be read to from birth, because it is incredibly important. And yes, in short, the educational attainment of parents is a predictor of success, but you can break the cycle, and I'm living proof.
Very good. All right.
Thank you.